See, I'm just gonna do full screen. There we go. They've stopped playing music, so I'm gonna start again. I don't know how long I'm going to be. I might be having a friend over, might not. Don't know. Okay. So where are we at?
Because we only have to do the edit mode positioning for one side. The other side is done automatically for us. Now position the thigh bones to align properly with the model. Select the tip of the thigh bone and extrude to create the shin. You'll notice that even the extrude happens on both sides. Convenient, eh? Now position the shins properly and extrude out the foot bone.
Wait, hold on. Okay, so where was...
Because we only... Now, if we move one of the leg bones, axis of the armature, L and R naming convention. Name them thigh.L and thigh.R. Now this L and R naming convention for left and right versions of the same bone is not just for clarity, although it is for that too. But if we name our bones this way, we can take advantage of a cool feature in Blender that automatically keeps bones mirrored across the x-axis of the armature. In the T panel, the panel on the left of the 3D view, there's a checkbox that appears when we're in armature edit mode, labeled x-axis mirror.
Okay, hold on. So what if I'm armature edit mode? Shift D. Names. G. Okay. Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Z, Z. G. Control Z. Z. Okay. So 50. Name. Mirror editing. Enter. Um, Wait, hold on. I did it. I did it. Okay. There we go. So, that right, left, okay, okay. So that worked. That Great Scott. So I duplicated it, making sure it had .L and .R. Well, I made sure I had one side be .L. I duplicated it, then turned on x-axis mirror. And then... Oh boy, oh boy. Oh boy, okay. We're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere. No, I keep doing full screen on that instead of freaking full screen on... Okay.
Turn it on. Now, if we move one of the leg bones, the other stays the exact mirror of it. And this is going to help us set up the armature a lot more quickly, because we only have to do the edit mode positioning for one side. The other side is done automatically for us. Now position the thigh bones to align properly with the model. Select the tip of the thigh bone and extrude to create the shin. You'll notice that even the extrude happens on both sides. Convenient, eh? Now position the shins properly and extrude out the foot bone. Now unparent the foot from the shin, since the foot needs to be free, and make sure to select clear parent rather than disconnect bone. Disconnect bone would only disconnect the bones, but they would still have their parent-child relationship. Now duplicate the foot bone to create a toe bone, and place it appropriately. And make the toe the child of the foot. Notice that even parenting is properly mirrored for us. It's pretty cool. Now make the thigh bones the children of the body. And let's duplicate the toe to create the pole target. It's convenient since it's already the child of the foot. Now let's go name all of these bones. Unfortunately, naming is not automatically mirrored, since the mirroring itself is based on the naming, not the other way around. since the mirroring itself is based on the naming, not the other way around.
So, I need a pull target. Pull target. Y. 50. Okay, so that did make new ones. Okay. Okay. So now transform, rotate. Oh. 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 Okay. So I can do that. Relations. Uh, Pull target.
And that's it for the edit mode setup for the legs and feet. Now let's do the pose mode setup. Unfortunately, pose mode doesn't have any mirroring functionality, so we'll have to do everything on both sides. First, add the IK constraints for the legs. Now go and configure them. Set the chain length to 2. And set the pull targets.
Inverse kinematics. Constraints. Wait, hold on.
Configure them. Just add the IK constraints for the legs.
Um, Inverse kinematics. Properties, armature, inverse kinematics. Inverse kinematics. Okay. Inverse. So, hold up, how am I supposed to...
Now go and configure them. Set the chain length to 2. And set the pull targets.
Pull target. Okay. I'm starting to have a little bit of an anxiety.
And adjust the pull target offset. Now lock the IK axes on the shins. And finally, configure the toes with Euler and the appropriate locked axes. Ta-da! That seemed pretty easy, eh? It was really just my long-winded explanations that made it seem complex. Now on to the eyes.
Pose mode? What does animate properly? Animate property. I'm getting lost. Hold on, maybe what needs to happen is I need to rewatch the leg and inverse kinematics.
To kick things off, let's start with the legs. Get it? Kick things off. Legs. To design this leg rig to be effective, we need to think about what the most convenient way to animate a walk is. Or at least, what would be the least inconvenient way. To get the thinking started, let's find out what would happen if we rigged a leg as just a couple of bones that are the children of the body. Add an armature to the scene. Switch to side view and go into edit mode. Right now, we're just playing around. We're playing with ideas. The point of this is to just be free, with nothing considered sacred or final. This is our playground for problem solving. Our problem-solving playground. So let's say that the default bone represents the body of the character. And let's add 2 more bones to represent a leg. Position them to be like the upper and lower parts of the leg. Now let's make the upper leg the child of the body. And let's make the lower leg the child of the upper leg. But in this case, instead of choosing keep offsets, like we usually do, let's select connected and see what happens. How odd. The lower leg moved. It's
Control P, keep offset. Parent, labor. Clear. Alt B. Alt B. Alt P. Clear parent. Okay. Control P. Keep offset. Control P. Keep offsets. That still puts the dotted line down there. Is that supposed to be the case? can't be multiple parents? Sorry, a parent can't have multiple kids? Control P. Not connected. Alt P. Clear parent. Alt P. Yeah, there's no parent connection. So what am I doing? Or or display in front. Animation, no. Selection sets, no. Custom properties, no. Constraints, add a constraint. So inverse kinematics. Properties, bone, inverse kinematics. Bone. Parent is the up leg. Inherit bone connections. Bones. Bendy bones, no. Local location. Inherits rotation or scale of parent bone. Pose mode. Pose mode. Inverse kinematics. Add constraint. Stretch influence the making. This allow movement around axis, influence disable if is locked. Limit movement around the axis. Okay. Okay, but this isn't telling me. Steps, auto step, initial lever, simulation animation. Okay, but okay, but that doesn't.
Top endpoint now lines up exactly with the upper leg's bottom endpoint. In fact, if we try to select this endpoint and move it, they both move together. The two endpoints are now merged into one. And this is what the connected item in the bone parenting menu means. When you connect bones together like this, they're called a bone chain. You can also quite easily create bone chains by selecting an endpoint and pressing the E key. This extrudes a new bone from that endpoint, which is a connected child of the bone you extruded from. To confirm, left-click. You can continue hitting E and left-clicking to extend the bone chain further and further. If we go into pose mode now, we can see that the translation transforms are grayed out. This is because you cannot translate bones that are connected to their parent. You can only rotate and scale them. But they do move, of course, if you rotate or move their parent. This connected feature is really just for our convenience as riggers, and it doesn't really enable anything special. We could manually line up the bone's endpoints and lock their location transforms to get pretty much the same effect. But there are a lot of cases where you want these sorts of chains of bones, and this connected child feature, it just makes it a lot easier for us to manage. Let's go back into edit mode and delete all the bones except the body and leg bones. Now to test this simple leg rig that we've just created, let's go back into pose mode. And if you think this is a lot of mode switching, you have no idea what you're getting into. There will be so much more mode switching as we get into more complex rigging. So let's say that we're going to animate a walk with this. Never mind that there's only one leg. Pretend there's another one. Use your imagination. A common similarity between all walks is that at some point in time, a foot is going to be on the ground, and it will remain relatively stationary while it's there. It's also a common similarity that during this time, the body is going to continue moving forward, because, walking makes you move forward. So the question now is this easy to accomplish with this rig? Let's try. Mark where the foot is supposed to be with an empty. Now move the body forward. Okay, well, now we need to adjust the leg to keep the foot in place. And tedious. That's how the body was moving. That sucks. So hopefully you can see, for us to be able to make the foot stay put and make the body move forward, all while the leg automatically stays properly attached to both. As it turns out, there is a great way to do this, and it's called inverse kinematics. Inverse kinematics, in its simplest form, is a way to instruct a bone chain to try really hard to keep its tip connected to something else, without moving its base. Sometimes this is impossible, for example, if that something else is too far away or too close, but it tries really hard. In this case, we can use inverse kinematics to tell our leg to stay connected to the foot whenever possible. To do this, though, we first need a foot bone. So let's add another bone near the end of the leg to represent the foot. We also need to make sure that the knee is slightly bent in edit mode, so do that if you haven't already. I'll explain why that's important in a later section of the DVD, but in a nutshell, it's going to tell the inverse kinematics solver which direction the knee should bend.
Okay.
Now we need to add the inverse kinematics. In Blender, inverse kinematics is considered a constraint, although it actually operates outside of the constraint system to an extent, but I'll explain that later when I discuss how the constraint stack functions. But for now, let's keep it simple. Inverse kinematics is the first constraint we're going to use that involves one bone affecting another bone. Remember that there are two ways to add constraints: via the constraints panel or bone constraints panel, and via a hotkey in the 3D view. To add the inverse kinematics constraint via the bone constraints panel, we need to select the last bone in the chain, because even though the constraint will affect both bones, IK constraints always exist on the last bone we want affected in the chain.
Okay. So, selecting the last bone in the chain.
Now add the constraint via the menu. Inverse kinematics.
Bone collections. Bone constraints. Okay. Bone constraints. Yeah, but why is it not showing up? Bone. Bones have. As bones behave like objects in pose mode, they can also be constrained. This is why the Constraints tab is shown in both Object Mode and Edit Mode. This panel contains the constraints of the active bone. Its name is displayed at the top of the panel in the bone static field. Bone constraints. Object mode. Okay. Bone constraint. Inverse can. No object, not exclusively in. Okay. So now I found that. Add bone constraint. Inverse kinematic. Okay. Full target. Armature. Did I name this bone? Bone. Full target. Bone constraints. Full target. Chain length. 2. Okay.
Next requires a target for the bone chain to attempt to stay connected to.
Target. Armature. Foot left. Okay. Oh boy. Well, oh jeez. Oh jeez. Oh jeez. Okay. Object armature. Bone. Full target. Chain. 2. Object armature. Full target. Inverse kinematics. Chain length 2. Full target. Armature. I gotta rename this bone full target again. Bone constraints. Add bone constraints. Inverse kinematic. Target. Armature. Foot left. Full target. Oh, that's wrong. That's wrong. That's so wrong. Okay. I'm not supposed to be putting inverse kinematics on the full target. I need to put inverse kinematics on this low leg left. Full target. Armature. Full target. Okay. Target. Armature. Bone. Foot left. Okay. Okay. Full angle. $90. Alright. Are you sure about that? Why is this pull angle so weird?
If we don't specify one, the IK constraint has no goal, and it won't really do anything. In this case, we want it to stay connected to the foot, so the foot is our target. Click on the target field in the IK constraint. Just like with driver variables, we first have to specify the armature object, and then the bone name. So specify the armature in the first field. Now we can specify the bone in the bone field. Oh my. Which of these is a foot bone? They're all just named bone, with a number appended on the end. We really need to name these bones, so let's do that before we move on. Okay, much better. This is one of the reasons it's important to name things in our rigs. It makes things less confusing, not only for other people that look at the rig later, but it also makes things a lot less confusing for us. Okay, now let's specify the foot in the bone field. Wow! It just immediately snapped to connect with the foot bone. But before we move on, let's see how to add this using a hotkey. To add a constraint where one bone affects another, you first select the bone that will do the you select the bone that will be affected. This is kind of the reverse of specifying parents, which can make this confusing and hard to remember. Unfortunately, we just need to put up with that. Next, hit Ctrl-Shift-C and select Inverse Kinematics. Ta-da!
Ctrl-Shift-C.
Now we have an ID constraint with all the target information filled out for us. This is a much faster way to add constraints, and it's the way that I usually do it. Now let's try moving the foot bone around. Nifty. The leg stays connected to it.
Okay, so... Oh. Why is it doing rotate instead of G? I'm not doing something right. When I switch in and out of object and edit mode, like moving around, I don't understand why that's happening.
However, notice that the body bone is moving too. How strange. It's not part of the leg's bone. Notice but it also makes things a lot less confusing for us. Okay, now let's specify the foot in the bone field. Wow! It just immediately snapped to connect with the foot bone. But before we move on, let's see how to add this using a hotkey. To add a constraint where one bone affects another, you first select the bone that will do the affecting, and then you select the bone that will be affected. This is kind of the reverse of specifying parents, which can make this confusing and hard to remember. Unfortunately, we just need to put up with that. Next, hit Ctrl-Shift-C and select Inverse Kinematics.
Okay. So, how about How about in pose mode, we forget about that. Do that. Then do that. Control Shift C. Inverse kinematic. Full target. Armature. Full target. That does that.
Ta-da! Now we have an IK constraint with all the target information filled out for us. This is a much faster way to add constraints, and it's the way that I usually do it. Now let's try moving the foot bone around. Nifty. The leg stays connected to it. However, note
Let's have no pull target. Shift spacebar G. Why? Why is it?
Notice that the body, the way that I usually target and kinematics. Ta-da! Now we have an IK constraint with all the target information filled out for us. This is a much faster way to add constraints, and it's the way that I usually do it. Now let's try moving the foot bone around. Nifty. The leg stays connected to it. However,
Move. Big arrow widgets run script. That's not what I That's not what I need.
Notice that the body bone is moving too. How strange. It's not part of the leg's bone chain. The reason this happens is because inverse kinematics actually isn't limited to just bone chains.
Okay, but how do I actually get this to move? Transform pivot point. I don't understand why this is happening. Yeah.
Actually strange. It's not part of the leg's bone. Notice that the body and select inverse kinematics. Ta-da! Now we have an IK constraint with all the target information filled out for us. This is a much faster way to add constraints, and it's the way that I usually do it. Now let's try moving the foot bone around. Nifty. The leg stays connected to it. However, notice that the body bone is moving too.
So pose tools. Access here. Euler. He did something with Euler. What did he do with Euler?
Need to put up with that. You first select the bone and it also which of these is a foot bone, then the bone name. So specify. Click on the target field in the IK constraint. Just like with driver variables, we first have to specify the armature object, and then the bone name. So specify the armature in the first field. Now we can specify the bone in the bone field. Oh, number dependent on the end. Which direction the knee should bend. In a nutshell, the leg automatically stays properly attached to the inverse kinematic. Out moving it is impossible leg to represent the foot. We also need to make sure that the knee is slightly bent in edit mode, so do that if you haven't already. I'll explain why that's important in a later section of the DVD, but in a nutshell, it's going to tell the inverse kinematic solver which direction the knee should bend. Now we need to add the inverse kinematics. In Blender, inverse kinematics is considered a constraint, although it actually operates outside of the constraint system to an extent, but I'll explain that later when I discuss how the constraint stack functions. But for now, let's keep it simple. Inverse kinematics is the first constraint we're going to use that involves one bone affecting another bone. Remember that there are two ways to add constraints: via the constraints panel or bone constraints panel, and via a hotkey in the 3D view. To add the inverse kinematics constraint via the bone constraints panel, we need to select the last bone in the chain, because even though the constraint will affect both bones, IK constraints always exist on the last bone we want affected in the chain. Now add the constraint via the menu. Inverse kinematics requires a target for the bone chain to attempt to stay connected to. If we don't specify one, the IK constraint has no goal, and it won't really do anything. In this case, we want it to stay connected to the foot, so the foot is our target. Click on the target field in the IK constraint. Just like with driver variables, we first have to specify the armature object, and then the bone name. So specify the armature in the first field. Now we can specify the bone in the bone field. Oh my. Not move. Better. This is one of the reasons that look at how let's specify the affecting defying parent. Now we have an IK constraint with all the target information filled out for us. This is a much faster way to add constraints, and it's the way that I usually do it. Now let's try moving the foot bone around.
But here's the problem. When I try to move the foot, it just wants to rotate it. I don't want it to rotate. I want to actually move it. Gee, my... GG. Okay, I'm gonna turn the volume of the music down because this is... Why? Snapping. Okay. You know what? You know what? I'm just going to watch this complete series, and then I'll figure out what the updated controls are, because dissecting based off of this old version because there had to have been some changes. There has to be a reason why that's not working. I'll find other tutorials or just continue reading the manual. That's just how it's gotta be.
Notice that the body bone is moving too. How strange. It's not part of the leg's bone chain. The reason this happens is because inverse kinematics actually isn't limited to just bone chains. It actually functions on any parent-child hierarchy of bones. It will keep searching up the hierarchy, parent to grandparent to great-grandparent, until it can't find any more bones. To limit the constraint to the leg bones, we need to specify a limit on how far up the hierarchy it searches. And thankfully, this is extremely simple to do. We just change the chain length. 0, the default value, is a magic number for this field, and it means unlimited. But any other number, such as, for example, 2, tells it that we only want it to affect, in that case, 2 bones up the chain. And since we only have 2 leg bones, that is indeed the number that we want. Now when we move the foot, only the leg bones move. Yay! Also, if we move the body, the leg sticks too. Woohoo! So IK, or inverse kinematics, seems pretty magical, and in a lot of ways it is, but we're still going to run into some problems with it if we just leave it how it is right now, and that's because inverse kinematics is an under-constrained problem. What on earth do I mean by that? Well, to start with, I'm not talking about Blender's constraint system. I'm using the word constrained in a different sense now. In this case, when I say that inverse kinematics is solving an under-constrained problem, I mean that there are multiple possible solutions. If we have a 2-bone chain and a point that we want it to reach, there are actually multiple solutions. It could bend this way, or it could bend that way. And in 3D space, the bones can twist and rotate around every which way. In fact, there's an infinite number of solutions to this problem. And it only gets worse if we have more than 2 bones. Then even when restricted in 2D space, there's still an infinite number of solutions. That's what I mean when I say that IK is an under-constrained problem. The IK solver has a lot of wiggle room to choose its solution from. Now, in a lot of cases, this simply doesn't matter. Blender's IK solver does a pretty good job of finding smooth, sensible solutions to the problem. But in this case, we really do care about the specific solution. In particular, knees-on bipedal creatures only bend on one axis, and Mr. Squeegee Feet is no different. Unfortunately, the IK solver doesn't care about that, and it will bend the shin bone in any direction it likes. Fortunately, we can tell the IK solver to care. Select the shin bone, and go to the bone properties. Find the inverse kinematics panel, and toggle it open if necessary. There are a bunch of parameters in here, all of which allow us to configure how the IK solver uses this bone. In this case, what we care about are these toggles with the lock icons. These allow us to tell the IK solver not to rotate on these axes. It's just like locking rotation axes for manual rotation in the 3D view, except this is for the inverse kinematics solver. We want the knee to only bend on one axis. But which axis? Let's go find out. We can't very easily rotate the shin bone right now because its rotation is controlled by the IK constraint. But I have a new trick to show you that will let us figure out the bone's axes without rotating anything. Go to the armature properties and find the display panel. There's a checkbox labeled axes. Click it. Aha! Suddenly, there are weird arrows sticking out of our bones with letters attached. Let's take a closer look. These are visualizations of the bone's axes. For rotations, the bone will rotate around the axes, so we can see then that the axis we want the knee to bend on is the x-axis. Return to the bone's IK properties and lock the other 2 axes. Now when we move the foot, the knee only bends on the x-axis. Woohoo! Because of the length of my explanations, this may already seem really complex, but let's take a look at what we've actually done so far. We've added a 2-bone chain for the leg, We've added an IK constraint to make the leg stick to the foot. We've told the IK to only affect the leg bones. And we've told the IK solver to only bend the knee on one axis. So we really haven't actually done that much yet. And it's not really so complex. I'm just long-winded. Sorry. But we do still have one last step before this is a finished leg rig, and that is to give the animator control over what direction the knee is pointing. Right now, the knee direction is pretty much up to the IK solver. It will generally point in the right direction, for reasons that I'll explain when we look at IK more in depth. But there are still situations where the animator will need direct control, for example if they are animating an old man with wobbly knees. There are a couple of ways to do this, but my favorite for bipedal characters is called a pull target. To explain how a pull target works, imagine that we drew a straight line between the base of an IK bone chain and that chain's target. If we rotate the entire bone chain around that line, as if the line were an axis, the bone chain would still reach the target exactly, no matter how we spun it around that line. What a pull target does is it limits that part of the solution. It's a secondary target that tells the IK bone chain how to orient itself around that line. Let's dive in and try it out. Go into edit mode and add another bone in front of the leg. Name it pull target. Now go to the leg's IK constraint and specify that bone as the pull target. Remember that just like everywhere else that you specify a bone, you need to specify the armature first. You'll notice that immediately the leg rotates to kind of an odd angle. This is because the pull target is forcing it to spin into that position. If we switch to a top view and move the pull target around, we can see that the leg spins around exactly as much as we move the pull target around it. The basic idea is that if you imagine a line connecting the leg to the pull target,
Okay.
that line determines the spin of the leg.
Hold on. Is it because I have the pull target as a parent, as a child of Alt P clear parent? Alt P clear parent. Alt P. Alt P clear parent. Bone constraints. Pull target. Armature. Pull target. Why is it still doing that? Hold on. Snap. Aaron. Up leg left. Target. Full target. Negative 90. There we go. There we go. Okay. So I had the pull target as a child to something, and that was the problem. So now I have that. I have that. So hold on. Now what is it? What is it like this? What's the add bone constraints again?
Of course, having ta-da will be affected. This is kind of the reverse of specifying parents, which can make this confusing and hard to remember. Unfortunately, we just need to put up with that. Next, hit Control-Shift-C and select Inverse Kinematic.
Control-Shift-C. Control-Shift-C. Inverse kinematics. Target foot. Pull. Target. Dot R. Constraints. Pull target. Armature. Pull target R. Now, if it's bone, up leg R. Okay. Negative 90. Wonderful. So I can Cool, cool. Cool, cool. So that's the... So that's how you do that. Okay. So pose mode. Down. Pull target. R. Wonderful. Now it's... Ooh. Okay, okay. I was able to figure that out. I am more happy now. I was pretty upset, but now I'm happy. So, and I didn't use AI. Okay, here we go.
Ta-da! Now we have an IK constraint with all the target information filled out for us. This is a much faster way to add constraints, and it's the way that I usually do it. Now let's try moving the foot bone around. Nifty. The leg stays connected to it. However, notice that the body bone is moving too. How strange. It's not part of the leg's bone chain. The reason this happens is because inverse kinematics actually isn't limited to just bone chains. It actually functions on any parent-child hierarchy of bones. It will keep searching up the hierarchy, parent to grandparent to great-grandparent, until it can't find any more bones. To limit the constraint to the leg bones, we need to specify a limit on how far up the hierarchy it searches. And thankfully, this is extremely simple to do. We just change the chain length. 0, the default value, is a magic number for this field, and it means unlimited. But any other number, such as, for example, 2, tells it that we only want it to affect, in that case, 2 bones up the chain. And since we only have 2 leg bones, that is indeed the number that we want. Now when we move the foot, only the leg bones move. Yay! Also, if we move the body, the leg sticks too. Woohoo! So IK, or inverse kinematics, seems pretty magical, and in a lot of ways it is. But we're still going to run into some problems with it if we just leave it how it is right now. And that's because inverse kinematics is an under-constrained problem. What on earth do I mean by that? Well, to start with, I'm not talking about Blender's constraint system. I'm using the word constrained in a different sense now. In this case, when I say that inverse kinematics is solving an under-constrained problem, I mean that there are multiple possible solutions. If we have a two-bone chain and a point that we want it to reach, there are actually multiple solutions. It could bend this way, or it could bend that way. And in 3D space, the bones can twist and rotate around every which way. In fact, there's an infinite number of solutions to this problem. And it only gets worse if we have more than two bones. Then even when restricted in 2D space, there are still an infinite number of solutions. That's what I mean when I say that IK is an under-constrained problem. The IK solver has a lot of wiggle room to choose its solution from. Now, in a lot of cases, this simply doesn't matter. Blender's IK solver does a pretty good job of finding smooth, sensible solutions to the problem. But in this case, we really do care about the specific solution. In particular, knees-on bipedal creatures only bend on one axis, and Mr. Squeegee Feet is no different. Unfortunately, the IK solver doesn't care about that, and it will bend the shin bone in any direction it likes. Fortunately, we can tell the IK solver to care. Select the shin bone, and go to the bone properties. Find the inverse kinematics panel, and toggle it open if necessary. There are a bunch of parameters in here, all of which allow us to configure how the IK solver uses this bone. In this case, what we care about are these toggles with the lock icons. These allow us to tell the IK solver not to rotate on these axes. It's just like locking rotation axes for manual rotation in the 3D view, except this is for the inverse kinematics solver. We want the knee to only bend on one axis. But which axis? Let's go find out. We can't very easily rotate the shin bone right now because its rotation is controlled by the IK constraints. But I have a new trick to show you that will let us figure out the bone's axes without rotating anything. Go to the armature properties and find the display panel. There's a checkbox labeled
Okay. Armature. Physics. Object. Constraints. Data. Inverse kinematics. Constraints. Physics. Why does that only show it for that? Okay, there we go.
axes. Click it. Aha! Suddenly, there are weird arrows sticking out of our bones with letters attached. Let's take a closer look.
Okay, hold on. I want to... Okay. So what's next?
These are visualizations of the bone's axes. For rotations, the bone will rotate around the axes. So we can see then that the axis we want the knee to bend on is the x-axis. Return to the bone's IK properties and lock the other two axes.
Okay. Bone. Bone. IK properties. C and X. Wait, no. Z and Y. Z and Y. Wonderful. Oh, wait, hold on. Oh, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Yay. Okay. So we have that. We have that. Okay.
Now when we move the foot, the knee only bends on the x-axis. Woohoo! Because of the length of my explanations, this may already seem really complex, but let's take a look at what we've actually done so far. We've added a 2-bone chain for the leg. We've added an IK constraint to make the leg stick to the foot. We've told the IK to only affect the leg bones. And we've told the IK solver to only bend the knee on one axis. So we really haven't actually done that much yet. And it's not really so complex. I'm just long-winded. Sorry. But we do still have one last step before this is a finished leg rig, and that is to give the animator control over what direction the knee is pointing. Right now, the knee direction is pretty much up to the IK solver. It will generally point in the right direction, for reasons that I'll explain when we look at IK more in depth. But there are still situations where the animator will need direct control, for example if they are animating an old man with wobbly knees. There are a couple of ways to do this, but my favorite for bipedal characters is called a pull target. To explain how a pull target works, imagine that we drew a straight line between the base of an IK bone chain and that chain's target. If we rotate the entire bone chain around that line, as if the line were an axis, the bone chain would still reach the target exactly, no matter how we spun it around that line. What a pull target does is it limits that part of the solution. It's a secondary target that tells the IK bone chain how to orient itself around that line. Let's dive in and try it out. Go into edit mode and add another bone in front of the leg. Name it pull target. Now go to the leg's IK constraint and specify that bone as the pull target. Remember that just like everywhere else that you specify a bone, you need to specify the armature first. You'll notice that immediately the leg rotates to kind of an odd angle. This is because the pull target is forcing it to spin into that position. If we switch to a top view and move the pull target around, we can see that the leg spins around exactly as much as we move the pull target around it. The basic idea is that if you imagine a line connecting the leg to the pull target, the angle of that line determines the spin of the leg. Of course, having the knee point off to the side of the pull target isn't very intuitive for animators. It would be much better if the knee pointed at the target. Fortunately, this is easy to adjust. Go to the IK constraint again and find the field labeled pull angle. We can adjust the offset from the pull target here. Much better. Now the knee points at the pull target. Something important to notice about the pull target is that if we switch to the side view again and move it up and down, it doesn't do anything. This is because the only thing that matters about the pull target is its position around the line, not the position along it. I find the easiest way to think about this is to look straight down the line between the base of the bone chain and the IK target. Only the motion of the pull target on this view plane matters. Now, if we move the foot, that line moves. And the plane of motion that matters moves too. We can move the pull target huge distances along that line, and it doesn't affect anything. Only the position around the line matters. Now, one last thing to do is make the pull target the child of the foot. That may seem kind of weird, but it makes things a little bit more convenient, since feet and knees usually point in roughly the same direction along the IK line. This way the animator can better ignore the pull targets when they don't need to do anything special. Now that we have the pull target set up, we're finished designing the leg rig. Hooray! We can move the foot, and we can move the body, and control where the knee is pointing. This leg rig design is called an IK leg, because pointing. And we can move the body and control where the knee is pointing. This leg rig design is called an IK leg. We got the pull target set up, we're going to be the same direction along the IK line. This way the feet. That may seem kind of weird, but it makes things a little bit more convenient, since feet and knees usually...
Okay. So I do make this a parent-child relationship. Control P. Edit mode. Control P. Keep offset. Close mode. Incorrect. Control key box. Okay. Rosemary. But that doesn't do the thing. Oh, hold on. How do I redo? Shift Control Z. Access object. Axis. Not axis. Axis. Oh boy. Okay. So
Point in roughly the same direction along the IK line. This way the animator can better ignore the pull targets when they don't need to do anything special. Now that we have the pull target set up, we're finished designing the leg rig. Hooray! We can move the foots, and we can move the body and control where the knee is pointing. This leg rig design is called an IK leg because it is designed entirely around inverse kinematics. By contrast, our first attempt at a leg rig, where we manually rotated the leg joints, is called an FK, or forward kinematics leg rig. Put simply, forward kinematics is when you rotate a bone chain joint by joint, whereas an inverse kinematics rig is a rig like the one we just created, where the rotations of the bones are automatically calculated based on a desired target. Both kinds of rigs are useful for different situations, and later on we'll learn how to build a rig that lets us do both. But for now, we're going to leave it as is, because we know we're only going to use this rig for walking, so we don't need FK. Next up is feet, and thankfully, we're going to keep Mr. Squeegee's feet very simple. The model just has two pieces per foot, the heel and the toe. And we're going to take the easy way out for this rig and just have one bone for each. But even so, there are some things that we need to think about. The first is translation and rotation axes. The translation and rotation axes of bones are determined by the bone's orientation in edit mode. I touched on this briefly before, but I'm going to go a bit more in-depth into it now. Let's take a look at this armature I've prepared for us. We can see the rest position of the bones by entering edit mode on the armature. I've enabled axis display so that we can see the axes of the bones, and we can see that the y-axis of this bone is pointing off at an angle. Now, if we go into pose mode and play with this bone's y-translation, we see that the bone moves along that local axis of the bone. Even if we rotate the bone in pose mode, that original edit mode orientation is still what determines the translation axes. Moreover, if we give the y-translation a value of, say, 3, and then change the bone's orientation in edit mode, then in pose mode, its position changes. This is because the y-translation value is now operating on the new y-axis, and is going in this direction instead of this direction like it was before. This applies for all of the translation axes, not just the y-translation axis. And it also applies to the rotation axes. If we switch the bone to Euler rotation, and play with its y rotation axis, we see that it rotates around the bone's edit mode y-axis as well. These oriented axes, with their custom zeroed out positions, are called the local space of the bone. You may have noticed me using that term before, and it is in contrast to something called world space, or sometimes also called global space. World space is the overall space of the scene that everything exists in. If we have a bone floating in the scene somewhere, its world space translation might be something like x equals 2 and y equals 3. That is the absolute translation coordinates of the bone in the scene. On the other hand, if its rest position in edit mode was off here somewhere, oriented at an angle, then the local space translation of the bone might be x equals 2, y equals 1. One way to think of this is to say that the world space is the absolute coordinates of a bone in the scene, whereas local space is the relative coordinates of a bone compared to its resting pose. But bones are not the only things that can have local spaces. They're just the only thing whose local space we can set directly. By default, an object's local space corresponds exactly to world space. But that can be changed if, for example, you give it a parent. In fact, we exploited that in the bouncy ball rig. Remember that when the parent was rotated, the translation axes of the ball changed with it. We were indirectly changing the local space of the ball via a parent. And that happens with bones as well. If we rotate the parent of this bone, then its local space rotates too. So the local space of both objects and bones is affected by their parents, but only the local space of bones can be directly set by us. Whew, that might be a lot to take in, and I apologize if that's the case. Spaces are an important concept in computer graphics and rigging, but they can also be kind of mind-bending. So for now, I'll just leave it at this, and we'll revisit later. But one last thing. It is important to realize that the coordinates we see here in the end panel, and that the animator will be animating with, always represent the local space transforms of the object or bone. In other words, animators are always animating in local space. And that's why we care about this with the foot. We want to place the foot bones so that their local translation and rotation axes make sense for the animator. If we put the foot bone at an angle, then there wouldn't be a simple single axis for up and down. Also, there wouldn't be a simple single axis for pivoting the foot around its heel. But it's helpful for the animator to have those simple, well-aligned axes, because it makes it simpler for them to, for example, tweak just the height of the foot, or manage the interpolation of the height of the foot. And these are important things for the animator to be able to do. So for our foot rig, we need two bones, the main foot bone and the toe. And the toe will be the child of the foot. And since we want them to have their axes nicely aligned, let's make them horizontally straight. To keep things simple, we're going to assume that the foot bone will be the direct target of the IK leg. So that means that it will need to be positioned where the leg is going to connect to it, which is at the ankle. And that's just a bit higher than the toe. We also want to consider which axis is the up axis for the foot. In Blender, the Z-axis is considered the de facto up axis, since that's what world space uses. Let's turn on axis visualization so that we can see if that's what we have or not. Uh-oh, looks like we have some adjustments to make. Fortunately, Blender lets us roll bones in edit mode. Select the bone, and press Ctrl R to roll the bone in edit mode. You can also change a bone's roll in the end panel here. By positioning the endpoints of bones and setting the roll, you have complete, full freedom to place the bones however you want. Now in pose mode, we also want to consider axis locking and rotation modes. Since the toe is just the floppy end of a squeegee, we really only need it to rotate on one axis. That means that we should first switch it to Euler, and lock all of its axes except the x-axis, which is what we want it to rotate on. Toes are also typically attached to their foot, so let's lock the toes' translation axes too so that it doesn't separate from the foot. Now the foot itself we can pretty much leave alone. It needs to be able to translate, so no locking there, and it is potentially going to be rotating on all rotation axes, so quaternions make sense for it. And there we go, a super duper stupidly simple foot rig. And yet somehow I still managed to fit in a confusing topic. Woohoo! Eyes, the window into the soul, or lack thereof. I'm not really sure that Mr. Squeegee Feet has a soul. After all, he has squeegees for feet. But still, he needs eyes to see. Unlike the leg and foot rigs, for this rig I've actually imported the eye meshes into our little rigging playground. We could have done that with the legs and feet too, and I encourage you to do that if you want to when testing out rig ideas. I've done it with the eyes because I think it will make the rigging a little less confusing when we get to our final solution. To start off, we clearly need to have at least one bone each for the eyes to be the children of, so let's add those. And let's rotate both of the eye bones down so that their y-axes are pointing in the same direction as the eyes. And let's position them at the center of each eyeball. To do this exactly, we can use Blender's cursor snapping tools. Select the eye, go into edit mode, and Alt-right click on one of the center edges to select an edge loop. Press Shift-S and select Cursor to Selected from the menu. This snaps the 3D cursor to the average position of the selection, which in this case will be the center of the eye. We could also do this in object mode with just the object selected, but that won't work if, for example, the eyes are part of a larger mesh. Now go back into edit mode on the armature. Select the eye bone, hit Shift-S, and select Selection to Cursor. Now the eye bone is positioned exactly at the center of the eye. Now do the same for the other eye. And let's name the eye bones I.L and I.R for the left and right eyes. And finally, let's parent the eyes to the bones. Remember, you need to be in pose mode to do this. if we wanted to, we could just stop here. These two bones could serve as controls for the animator, but I think we can do better. For one thing, a pair of eyes generally both do the same thing. If one eye looks left, the other usually looks left as well. This is because our eyes are wired to both look at the same point in space. But unfortunately, right now our poor little animator would have to manually manage both eyes. So one way that we could improve this rig would be to directly emulate the tracking behavior of eyes by having a target that the eye bones track. In fact, that's a really common and useful way to set up eye controls on characters, so let's do that. Add another bone smack dab in front of the eyes. Let's name it Eye Target. To make the eye bones track this target, we're going to use constraints. Select the target, and then one of the eye bones, and press Ctrl-Shift-C to bring up the constraints menu. Under the tracking section of the menu, we have a lot of constraints, but there are only two that really do what we want: Damped Track and Track 2. Both of them behave similarly in that they both will make the bone rotate to track a target, but Damped Track does it in a smoother, more stable way. There are situations where Track 2 may be what you want, but for most situations, Damped Track is a better choice, so choose Damped Track. You'll notice that the eye bone immediately snaps to point at the target, and the eye mesh goes along with it. And if we move the target, the eye tracks it. Woohoo! Let's do the same for the other eye. Yay! Now they're both tracking. But this still isn't entirely ideal. For one thing, the eyes have snapped to a slightly cross-eyed position. This is realistic, of course, since they are looking at a point relatively close by, but it may not be how we want our character to look. With this rig setup, we would have to move the target really far away for the eyes to appear like they did before. But that's kind of a nightmare for the animator to manage, since they'll have to zoom way far out every time they want to adjust the eyes. So what if instead, we find a way to keep the eyes uncrossed, no matter how close the eye target is? One obvious way to do this is to create two eye targets that are eye distance apart, and make them children of a master eye target control. Let's give that a try and see what happens. Add two more bones to be the child eye targets, and position them eye distance apart. Make them the children of the eye target. Now remove the existing constraints from the eye bones, and replace them with a damped track to their respective targets. Yay! Now there is no more cross-eyedness, and we can move the target as close as we want, and no cross-eyedness happens. But there is a problem. What if the head were to turn? We don't have a head bone, but we can still simulate this by selecting the eye bones and rotating them. Yeah, that's terrible. The eyes have gone all weird and cross-eyed again. And this is because the positions of the secondary eye targets are no longer aligned with the eyes. The animator would need to rotate the eye target to stay aligned with the eyes at all times. And guess what? That sucks. It's bad. It's unnecessary work for the animator. They shouldn't have to worry about that. So scrap that. It was a decent idea, but in practice, it turns out it has a lot of problems. And a lot of rigging ideas are like that, actually. Most of my ideas never make it into final rigs, because I find problems with them in the playground phase. That's normal, and that's fine. The important thing is that you don't get so married to an idea that you ignore other solutions that might be better. So let's look for a better solution. What, fundamentally, do we want these eye bones to do? What limitation are we trying to impose on them? Well, we want them to stay parallel to each other, or in other words, we want them to have the same rotation. Well, heck, there's an easy way to enforce that. A copy rotation constraint. They can't have different rotations if one of them is forced to copy the rotation of the other. So one way we could do this is to have one of the eyes track the target, and have the other eye copy the rotation of the first. But we'll run into problems with that too, because then both eyes will look off to the side when the eye target gets close. So what if instead we had both eyes copy the rotation of a third bone that tracks the target? Then we could place that third bone in the middle, so that it doesn't shift strangely when the eye target gets near. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do it. clear out the stuff we just did by deleting the extra eye targets and clearing out the constraints. Now duplicate one of the eye bones and move it smack in the middle of the eyes. Name it Mind's Eye. Mind's Eye. Now add the copy rotation constraint to the eye bones, making them copy the rotation of the Mind's Eye bone. Now when we rotate the Mind's Eye bone, the other two rotate with it. Cool. Now we just have to make the Mind's Eye bone track the eye target, and voila! Moving the eye target around now makes the eyes track it. But they stay parallel to each other instead of being cross-eyed. Nifty. There's still one last thing that we could do though, and that is to let the animator also animate the eyes individually on top of all of this. Do you remember how to do that? If something is automated, but we still want the animator to be able to animate on top of that automation, what do? We add parents, and automate the parents instead. So let's duplicate the eye bones to create some parents, and let's scale them down a bit so we can tell the difference between them and the eye bones. Now let's make the eye bones the children of those. And let's remove the eye bones constraints. And thankfully, when you duplicate bones, they take their constraints with them, so the parents already have the copy rotation constraints on them. But if they didn't, then we would add those at this point. So now we can move the eye target around. And we can also rotate the eyes manually if, for example, we wanted to make the character cross-eyed. Lastly, let's lock the translation axes on the eye bones, just so that the animator doesn't accidentally pull the eyes out of their sockets. And let's align the eye target so that Z-axis is up. And that's it. We now have a pretty decent eye rig setup. We now have the legs, the feet, and the eyes figured out. But what about the body? Or head, or whatever it is? Well, in the case of Mr. Squeegee Feet, his body head thing is really just a big ball, and it really only needs one bone. We want to make sure to orient that bone well so that the local space for it makes sense for the animator, but other than that, there's not much to do. So let's just move right along to putting it all together. First, let's add an armature and put it into X-ray and wireframe display, and turn on axis visualization. Let's make this first bone the body bone. Move the bone a bit below the center of the body sphere, so it will rotate a bit more like hips during a walk. And align it so that the Z-axis is pointing up. This way, the up-down translation axis will be the Z-axis, just like everything else. Name the bone Body. And now let's add the thigh bones for each leg. Name them Thigh.L and Thigh.R. Now this L and R naming convention for left and right versions of the same bone is not just for clarity, although it is for that too. But if we name our bones this way, we can take advantage of a cool feature in Blender that automatically keeps bones mirrored across the x-axis of the armature. In the T panel, the panel on the left of the 3D view, there's a checkbox that appears when we're in armature edit mode, labeled x-axis mirror. Turn it on. Now, if we move one of the leg bones, the other stays the exact mirror of it. And this is going to help us set up the armature a lot more quickly, because we only have to do the edit mode positioning for one side. The other side is done automatically for us. Now position the thigh bones to align properly with the model. Select the tip of the thigh bone and extrude to create the shin. You'll notice that even the extrude happens on both sides. Convenient, eh? Now position the shins properly and extrude out the foot bone. Now the foot from the shin, since the foot needs to be free, and make sure to select clear parent rather than disconnect bone. Disconnect bone would only disconnect the bones, but they would still have their parent-child relationship. Now duplicate the foot bone to create a toe bone, and place it appropriately. And make the toe the child of the foot. Notice that even parenting is properly mirrored for us. That's pretty cool. Now make the thigh bones the children of the body. And let's duplicate the toe to create the pole target. It's convenient since it's already the child of the foot. Now let's go name all of these bones. Unfortunately, naming is not automatically mirrored, since the mirroring itself is based on the naming, not the other way around. And that's it for the edit mode setup for the legs and feet. Now let's do the pose mode setup. Unfortunately, pose mode doesn't have any mirroring functionality, so we'll have to do everything on both sides. First, add the IK constraints for the legs. Now go and configure them. Set the chain length to 2. And set the pole targets. Adjust the pole target offset. Now lock the IK axes on the shins. And finally, configure the toes with Euler and the appropriate locked axes. That seemed pretty easy, eh? It was really just my long-winded explanations that made it seem complex. Now on to the eyes. Add a new bone for the eye target and position it. Now add 2 bones for the eyes and name them I.L and I.R. Position them appropriately. Duplicate them to create the parents, and make the parents a tad smaller. Make the eye bones the children of the parent bones, and parent the parents to the head. Now we're going to turn off X-axis mirror for a moment, because we don't want mirrored duplicates in the next step. Duplicate one of the parents, and move it to the middle for the mind's eye. Now name all of these bones that we haven't named already.
Okay. My friend is gonna be coming over soon, so I'll probably end up having to replay this episode when I get back. When I stream again. But I got the rig working. I got the legs working. I got the legs working. No, not object mode. Pose mode. Well, I haven't linked them to the mesh or whatever, but whatever.